Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Dom from Lensprotogo and LensRentals, and welcome back to the channel. In last week's video, I did a physical overview and a menu walkthrough of this thing, the Canon EOS C70. And at that time, I actually hadn't had a lot of experience shooting on this thing. But in the past couple of days, I've gotten to shoot on this camera a lot more, and I'm starting to get really familiar with it, and I'm starting to warm up to it. One thing I keep asking myself though, as I use this camera, is who is this camera for? The C70 has clearly borrowed characteristics from Canon's cinema line as well as its line of mirrorless cameras. And given that, it's sort of an in-between camera in a lot of ways. So in this video, I want to talk about who this camera is for. It's got some cine features that might be tempting for maybe indie filmmakers, but it's also built with some ergonomics in mind, which might give it an edge as a documentary camera. So which is it? Well, we'll start by looking at the cinema features of the EOS C70. Okay, so starting with what the C70 has going for it in the cinema world. First off, it's got an absolutely excellent image and great dynamic range, and that's hard to dispute. And that pretty much all has to do with the sensor that it's got that's borrowed from the C300 Mark III. It's got DCI 4K, which in the past has not always been an option for Canon cameras, and it can even do 4K in 120 frames per second. It has two different C-Log profiles and an HLG profile for color grading, and it has in-camera view assist for each of those color profiles. It's got all your classic exposure and focus tools for nailing that sort of stuff, so nothing new there, but what it does have is a built-in anamorphic D-squeeze, which is pretty distinctly a cinematic trait. Next, it's got two good 10-bit 422 codecs, the higher fidelity of the two being the XF-AVC codec, but the HEVC codec also looks pretty good, and that is what allows for 4K 120. So that's a good start, but now we're going to get into some of the things that make this not so friendly for the cinema world. There is no raw video from the C70, and there's actually nothing that you unlock from recording externally at all. Next, the C70 only takes SD cards, and that pretty much right there tells you that the C70 is not capable of any super serious recording modes that might require faster media. Also, SD cards just aren't as robust as the other types of media that you'll find in other cinema cameras. You also can't even record out to a solid state drive using the camera's USB-C port either. One thing media-wise though that it does have going for it is you can use the dual recording modes to assign the B card slot to record proxies. This camera is also RF mount, so you'll need an adapter to use basically any cine glass out there. But with that being said, some manufacturers are starting to roll out cine glass in RF mount. Also, if you're using the new Canon L lenses for RF mount, those are all focused by wire, and those are going to be a lot less precise focusing than a mechanically focused lens, in my opinion. And that really matters for precise focus pulls. Another big thing to consider is the C70 only has an HDMI port and no SDI, which is definitely the preferred cable in the filmmaking world. So that's a limitation there. Although I should say that the control over the HDMI signal in this camera is pretty good. So how do I feel about the Canon EOS C70 for cinema purposes? Well, it's not the perfect fit. There are definitely some limitations like no raw video output, and there's probably going to be some issues with compatibility with accessories. But depending what you needed out of this camera, it could for sure get the job done. I see the C70 having great potential on a short film set, or maybe a music video, or really any cinematic project that doesn't really call for a bunch of bells and whistles to be hanging off the camera. However, if you start to consider your other options for a Canon cinema camera, the C70 starts to look pretty good again if you consider that it has the same sensor as the C300 Mark III at half the price. But then again, at the same price, you could get a C200 or an older C300 and get raw video output, faster media, and the buildability that you really want out of a cinema camera. Okay, so if it's not a full-on cinema camera, maybe the EOS C70 is a full-on documentary camera. It's got amazing autofocus, and it even works in its 4K 120 FPS mode. It takes the BP-A series battery, which is the battery found on the C200 and C300, and that gives this excellent battery life. And this is huge for documentary shooting, internal NDs, and the C70 even has an extended ND range that's not available on the C2 and C300. It's also not terrible in low light, which has definitely been a criticism for Canon cameras in the past. The long GOP compression mode on this camera looks really nice considering its compression, and is really friendly on card space. And while I'm at it, I'll list all of the relevant recording times here based on a 128GB card if you want to pause the video and check those out. Speaking of the SD cards, the C70 has really great options for dual card recording, like dual slot recording and relay recording, which are each really great for documentary work in their own ways. So it's the perfect documentary camera, right? Well, I think we're getting warmer, but it still has some limitations in the documentary realm too. For example, for audio inputs, its main inputs are these two XLR minis, and these just aren't that common. And this ultimately means just getting adapters for these, because 99% of things in the audio world are regular sized XLRs or 3.5mm mic jacks. Also, you only have access to this audio mixer on the back if this screen is flipped out, and I can kind of foresee that being a problem. But to be fair, I should mention that it does have good audio features, including this audio inputs display, and the XAVC codec has 4 channels of audio, which is really nice. The camera also does have a decent array of inputs and outputs, but unfortunately where they're placed, you couldn't really shoulder rig this camera if you had anything plugged into there. So the C70 seems to me that it would be better suited in a documentary scenario than a cinema production scenario. But that begs the question, is it any better of an option than the tried and true Canon documentary beasts like the C200 and the C300? So from the perspective of non-fiction video production, I'm tempted to say it's pretty even. The C70 has absolutely incredible autofocus, and the image looks really stunning even if it's not RAW, which you probably wouldn't be shooting in RAW in a documentary anyways. Its long GOP mode looks really good, and this is really friendly on card space. It's also excellent on battery life, and I'm sure if you spent enough time shooting on this, you could get familiar with it to a point where you could just operate it without looking at it, which I know a lot of people are that familiar on their C100s and C200s. I see that being a possibility on this thing too. So I don't think that the Canon C70 is the perfect cinema camera, and I also think it's a really great documentary camera, but it's got some limitations there too. So this brings me back to my question again, who is the C70 for? Well, the kind of Disney Channel answer to this is it's a little bit for everyone, but I'm kind of serious about that because I think Canon set out to make a camera here that's like a jack of all trades, but doesn't necessarily choose one side over the other. So a more direct answer to my question of who is this camera for, in my opinion, I think this camera is for wedding/event videographers, corporate video producers, or maybe even sports shooters, and this is why I say this. This camera is capable of a stunning image, especially in 10-bit 422 with C-Log. Yet, I think this camera is best suited for a static shooting environment, like on a tripod. For example, for someone like a corporate video shooter, this is the perfect camera. It's absolutely ideal for interviews on a tripod, but you could very easily pop it off the tripod and get some handheld B-roll in an instant. That goes for weddings and events too, where in that case, you're probably not going to be building up this camera too much. So again, you can take it off the tripod and handhold something really easily if you needed to. I can see this being really great for wedding video too, because you could shoot the whole day in a pretty reasonable 4K codec and shoot in frame rates all the way up to 120 FPS for that slow, sappy, beautiful stuff. Also, I know a lot of wedding videographers who would really appreciate dual card slot recording for safety. Also, I do think that this could be a really great sports camera, where you could cover the whole game on a tripod at a nice compressed data rate, but also pop down onto the sidelines to get some handheld 4K 120 FPS stuff for the highlight reel. Okay, so that's gonna wrap up this video on who I think the Canon EOS C70 is for. So if you have any questions or insights, or you think that I missed anything to talk about in this video, drop a comment in the comment section and we'll start a discussion about where the C70 fits in the world of production. Also, if you liked this video, hit that thumbs up button down below. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button if you're not already. And if you are subscribed, you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified whenever we post new content, which is every week. So take care, and we'll see you in the next one.